you have reminded me how difficult this topic is, because I remember many years ago when Ada and I began co-curating Reflect Space, and when I began to do research on the topic, I would always lose my equilibrium and always get emotional, as I'm doing now. And Ada would come into the office and say, "Why are you crying? How can you not, when you read those words and you see those images, not be ungrounded and continue?" While it gives us fuel to fight for justice, it also is reminiscent of how humanity, how could it possibly do those things that we just witnessed, that we saw at the images. And that's difficult. Ada would say, "Don't cry, you're at work. This is a professional environment." I couldn't help it, and I can't help it now, many years later, dealing with this topic and the topics. So that leads me to the legal, where things become not so visual, but still are stories of people who have the resources and in addition to the resources, but the power to say, "You know what, I'm going to take this fight, and I'm going to take the fight to a courtroom and have someone, an arbiter, an objective arbiter, decide what my case is." I come from I'm a descendant of Armenian genocide survivors. We can't go back as Armenians to Turkey, to historical Armenia, to say, "You killed, you murdered, you stole, give us our things back. You pay for the injustices that you made us suffer." But years later, and in a different place, in the United States of America, in Los Angeles County, different communities, the Armenians, the Koreans, the Japanese, decided to take this place as the forum to present their grievances. So that's what my presentation is about. It's about the lawsuits, and the 3 different lawsuits that were brought in the United States courts in California, federal-based, state issues as well, and wanted to create a wrong from a wrong to a right. And some were successful and some were not, so I think that's what we're going to look at. Thank you for indulging me that. But, the cases that we have are Marutian v. New York Life, Hazaarian versus the Republic of Turkey, and Gingery v. Glendale. You recognize that Gingery is the Comfort Women statue. Everyone here is familiar with the peace statue, the Comfort Women statue that sits right behind our library in Glendale. But for a lawsuit, I would not have learned about it. I was never taught the Comfort Women sex slaves in the United States of America public school system that I grew up in, which was really telling because, ironically, if the community, the Japanese community, had not brought a lawsuit to the forefront, many people would not have, known about this statue, this bronze, 1,000+ pound bronze statue that sat in an unknown central park of Glendale. So I learned about it through a lawsuit, which is interesting. So again, how did it end up here? These different cases of wrongs that were committed in other countries, in Armenia, in Western Armenia, in Turkey, in Japan, and the Japanese colonies, but somehow they were brought here for monetary reasons, for recognition, and to make their voices be heard. The New York Life case is an interesting case because many people of the Armenian genocide, and this is brought into the United States way back in 1999, people had bought New York life insurance policies, and then the genocide occurred. As you can imagine, there was a lot of destruction, a lot of killing, a lot of evidence, everything was gone, and people were making claims when and if they could find their claims They sent it to New York Life, and New York Life denied them. So that's how the birth of Marutian v. New York Life came to be. There was a gentleman, he was a pharmacist, and he found his uncle's policy and decided not only just the policy, but the denials from New York Life. So he became the main plaintiff in a class action lawsuit against the New York Life. And New York Life, of course, insurance companies are notorious for wanting to deny cases when they can, right? So of course New York Life decides no, and a lawsuit is filed, and they decide, okay, there are many more claimants, so let's see if we can make it, this is a class action, and a class action after 84 years. But you all heard of a statute of limitations. It's something that bars. So when you have a personal claim, a contract claim, a very limited time, a window in which you can file a lawsuit. Well, guess what? The time had passed long ago. 84 years later, the legislation decided to pass a law that gave us very small window to Armenian genocide survivors to bring a claim against New York Life. And that's how this action, this lawsuit was able to survive, proceed, and a settlement eventually ensued. And I had the privilege of working on this case after it settled, and I was part of the team of people who were evaluating claims. People had to bring birth certificates, photographs, baptismal certificates, anything and everything that they could make their claim and connection to the original person who had purchased the life insurance. Otherwise, New York Life, or the insurance company, would have a windfall because nobody made these claims, and they would benefit and not have to pay what insurance companies are notorious for doing. So those were the obstacles, but what happened is the Armenian community was able to pass through legislation in California, and that's a significant takeaway here, because nobody slept on it. Somebody said, I have a case, and as a matter of fact, Mr. Marutian, the main plaintiff, when he was deposed for 4 days, New York Life said, we can settle this with you, and you don't have to take this anywhere, and it would be done. Mr. Marutian decided, no, this is not just about me, this is about my entire community and what the injustice that we have suffered. You owe monies and the claims to the descendants of the survivors. It was not easy, but eventually, after the big battle and all the claims, the $20 million settlement was reached. Many people thought it was insufficient, but others thought if we can get this, we're done. And as you can imagine, many people could not prove their claims and their relations, and so a bulk of the money was created to go to organizations, whether it were charitable or religious, and we were able to make sure New York Life paid what it had to do the right thing. And as a matter of fact, this particular case also served as an example. And then there was another lawsuit filed in France for other claimants who also had suffered and had not seen justice. So it really matters, and that people, even if it's an old situation somewhere else, that the United States courts were able to resolve here, right here in our backyards. The next case that I wanted to look at briefly, and it's the Hazaryan versus the Republic of Turkey, which is really difficult to serve or to sue a foreign government, right? And there are places, there are statutes in place that there's immunity. You cannot sue a foreign government. And Mr. Hazaryan was a gentleman, actually, a friend of mine. His father who was born in a village in Armenia, in western Armenia, the village was divided. It ended up on a Syrian and Turkish side, and he had, and his family had made pilgrimages, and this was to the site of Balum, which was a Greco-Roman site, but now a Christian pilgrimage site, and in Turkey, and he was unable to go back, and he really wanted to go back and wanted to pass on this tradition to his family, that he, as a descendant of the genocide, was unable to go back because of Turkey's policies. And Turkey had a policy that it was for Turks and it was not for Armenians, and it was a Kemal Atatürk leader's position that is currently in place today. People were forced to not speak the language and to convert, but Armenians were sent throughout the world after the genocide. So, and with no recourse, we couldn't go back. And what Mr. Hazaryan wanted to do is go back and pass on the tradition to his family, his home, and his site of where generations and generations, hundreds of years of families had gone and practiced this pilgrimage. And so they brought a lawsuit here, and it's a very interesting case because it really gets creative. And he applied for a visa based on his birthplace, which on his past, as a naturalized American citizen, said Turkey, right? Because he was born in Turkey, was in Armenia, and so he could go back based on a treaty of Lausanne, the right of return. People had a right to return to their own, and Turkey was a signatory to this treaty of Lausanne. And so Mr. Hazaryan attempted to go back, but when he applied on the website for a visa for the Turkish government, as an 87-year-old, his visa was not granted and it was not denied. And he had indicated in his application that he had a window. He was traveling in December, but when he applied for the visa in October of the year, they didn't respond, and he was denied, and he couldn't go back, and he was very frustrated, he was humiliated, he felt all these things. So lawyers came together and they put a really interesting lawsuit that, sorry to go back, it was elder abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violations of international law, which had to do with the Treaty of Lausanne, and the interference with inheritance of tradition and property. So Mr. Hazaryan was unable to pass down his traditions to his son. So that was a very interesting take on this case, because usually inheritance, maybe we're thinking of physical things, but here it was the intangible thing of passing on the tradition. So these lawyers really got creative. And when I spoke to the plaintiff, Gado, the son of Barkev, who is a friend who lives here, is a Glendale resident and also an attorney, he said it wasn't really about going, it was about the right of return. This whole case and the years and years and years of research and trying to figure out how to bring a case against or to pave the way of allowing people to go back to their homeland. Because in effect, Armenians are discriminated against because of their religion and who they are now, as who they identify as Armenians and as Christians. And even on the website where they're applying for these visas, there's a picture of Kemal Atatürk, who's known as the father and the orchestrator of the Armenian genocide, the father of modern-day Turkey. There's an image of him, and that says Turkey for Turks, which, what does it do? That implicitly or explicitly says it's not for anyone else. It's not for Armenians. It's not for you Armenians. It's not for you Christians, but it's for Turkey. So that's the barrier, and that's the basis. So there were other hurdles. There were huge hurdles here as well, because, as I mentioned, because of the immunity situation, Turkey said you can't serve us. You can't sue us. But because of these state claims, the elder abuse and these other intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the interference with inheritance, and things like that. The plaintiffs were able to succeed and move forward, despite the fact, and what's another really interesting twist is that the judge, sua sponte, which means on his own, decided you can't sue Turkey. But the lawyers had to get creative, and the lawyers had to brief the judge. This is before Turkey is even in the courtroom. Before Turkey gets served or is attempted to serve, then they do. They jump over the hurdles. They're able to, through the State Department, because they say you have to translate, and they take a whole heck of a lot of resources and funds and time and energy to translate the cause of actions, the lawsuit, the legal filing. And they are able to serve in Turkey with the State Department. But on a side note, Turkey writes a letter, 3-page letter to the court and says you can't let this go forward. They do anyway. So eventually, which proves that Turkey had knowledge, they knew of the lawsuit, despite saying you haven't served us, and you have to be served in order to show up in court. And if there's no proper service, that's a technical issue on which the case can be thrown out and die. But the plaintiff's attorneys, after a lot of hurdles, after a lot of time, after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, they were able to serve the government. And though Turkey never came into the courtroom, there was a default judgment that was entered despite the protestations of the judge. So there are inner workings, just as the Marutian case where the statute of limitations, the community came forward and had the state legislature change the statute of limitations. Turkey was behind the scenes trying to change their service, or having the judge from behind the scenes say you can't go on and go forth with this lawsuit because we haven't been served, we don't know about the case. But you do because you've written a letter to the judge, right? So these are very interesting things that are occurring. I get really passionate about these things, the way the law works and how fluid it can be at times, right? Depending on who the actors are, whose story. If I have a case, it's my story, my case, and I bring it forward. But there's other things that matter come into force and into play that change the course and the rules, and that's what we're seeing here. And I'm going to move forward to the Gingery case. I don't think of it as a Gingery case. I think of it as a comfort women statute case. But the woman, interestingly, decides to bring a lawsuit and tell the city of Glendale, hey, city of Glendale, you have no jurisdiction here. You're putting a statute that says there's a comfort woman, but that's the realm of the federal government, and it's not in your forum. You don't have a right to do this in our city. So you have to remove the statute. And what they argue, which is really interesting, is they argue, well, Glendale, we know, is notorious. There was a large Korean population and relationships with the city council, the community, and a presence. But a woman said, I feel uncomfortable going into the park and being there. I feel excluded, and therefore that was the harm. And in addition to, this isn't your realm because you're meddling into foreign, and you're going to offend Japan. Well, interestingly, I think very similar to what the Armenian community deals with, the meddling of the government of Turkey. Here we have the government of Japan coming in and throwing their money, their resources, their power behind this case to move it forward. And they create a whole organization to fight the comfort women issue. And the Global Alliance for Historical Truth, which is a corporation to fight what is being said about comfort women and the Japanese Imperial Army and all the other things that were happening here that they were not in agreement with. So this gentleman who was part of the Global Alliance, they couldn't even show that these people were part of Glendale, and who are they? That they're feeling offended or excluded or uncomfortable. And it's so interesting, right? But they use the word uncomfortable. The statue made them uncomfortable. What about the vast history? It's such a, it's almost like I want to cry. It's funny, but it's funny to the point where it's absurd. And it's, well, this, despite the meddling of the government of Japan, this lawsuit survived. They were able to move forward. There was a decision. Then there was an appellate decision that the city could. It's in their realm. It's in their right. There's no foreign preemption issue here. There's no U.S. policy. Just that Japan disliked it and they could stay. So now we have the statute. And what's more is that thanks to this lawsuit, like I said, more people know about it. More people are talking about it. It set a precedent. People like me, and it's now in the annals of the legal books for the kinds of things that when you bring a lawsuit against the city that they're in the wrong, this case comes up, right? This is a precedent. It laid the groundwork, and now a framework that other municipalities and things could follow as well if there's another lawsuit brought against the city. So it served multiple, I think, purposes. These are the things that you can read about what the court found. So I actually, it warms my heart that I had no knowledge of what the comfort women issue was, but then reading about it in the Glendale News Press, everything came to light. And then years later, when Ara and I were hired to do the social justice exhibitions, and when we curated so much more, we were able to learn and understand and appreciate and pass on to the rest of the community what it means and what the similarities, where you have different governments and you have the people, the regular people who have suffered and have the memories that they're carrying and the resistance and the solidarity that we are able to come together and now understand and appreciate each other's fights against the big injustices that have occurred and continue to occur, and how we can bring those injustices into the present day courtrooms here in the United States, far and away from where they initially occurred. And I think that's a great takeaway from the injustice and the legal and dry day-to-day, and that these also, as I mentioned, cases live on in the books and live on in the courtrooms and live on in the classrooms, whether it's in the exhibition spaces or if it's in law school classrooms. We can hail and say it's a precedent. We're going to be able to go forth, bring another case, or maybe not bring a case because you're not going to be able to win. But then the other argument is, who's going to be making those arguments? Who has the more resources and the power? But I think we could all say grassroots and the work of the people really comes and saves the day, because but for Mr. Marutian, but for Mr. Gazarian, but for the comfort women, the people who decided we're going to appeal to Glendale, we're going to put a statue, and we're going to fight for it, and win. These wins would not have occurred, and they and they remain, and justice is preserved, and the resistance that we carry on flourishes. And we have to take pride in the work that we do and continue to move forward with it and say, we have the law behind us, we have the resources behind us, and if it's a government of Japan, if it's a government of Turkey, or other powers that be that try to quash, they're not going to necessarily succeed, and we will succeed. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for the opportunity to be able to present these 3 different cases, and I hope that you were able to take something away from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Anahied. So we're going to be transitioning to the next part of the event. Today's themes really were centralized around education, comparative justice, and legal advocacy. Thank you both for your thoughtful and inspiring presentations. You approached this history from different perspectives through education, curriculum, and legal advocacy. And what resonated with me throughout both presentations is that the historical justice requires many forms of engagement. It requires educators who teach the truth, advocates who pursue accountability, and communities that refuse to let these stories be forgotten. I'd like to spend the next part of this section exploring some of those connections before we open the discussion to all of you. Should we have both of the speakers up here? Come on up. So the format is going to be the following. I'll ask one question to each person, and then the third question I will be asking to the both of you, and then we'll open it up for any questions or answers. I'll start with Ms. Hun. Your presentation.
You can call me Sun.
Okay, Sun. Start with Sun. Your presentation makes a really compelling case that the issue is not simply about history, but about how societies choose to remember or deny the past. In your view, what is at stake for future generations if historical denial is allowed to replace historical truth?
Well, I think history gives us a lot of important lessons. And if we allow wrong narratives of history, denying the voices of those who suffered and whose voices were sidelined, we are bound to repeat the same thing. We are bound to repeat that pattern. And none of us, and none of our future children and today's children should go through that. So in order, for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of our children, we have to identify and address this people and attempts of people trying to cover up the history and erase history and highlight the true and accurate the history, so that this world and our society and our communities and our communities can be more peaceful and secure for everyone, especially for little ones.
Thank you. For Anahied, one of the things I appreciated about today's presentations is that both remind us justice is not a single event. It is often a long process that unfolds across generations. Looking at both the Armenian and Korean experience, what do you believe are the essential ingredients for meaningful justice? Is it legal recognition, education, public memory, reparations, or something else?
It's a combination of all of the above. It's really critical. Sometimes they take, which one comes first, which one comes second, do they come at the same time? Education, knowledge. I mean, like I said, I had no idea what the comfort women issue was until I read that article in the Glendale News Press, my goodness, many years ago, and I thought, what is this? And if I didn't know about it, and schools aren't teaching it, and so you know, as an educator, how critical it is for the textbooks to be accurate, and there's a battle there. Like I mentioned, I'm a product of the public school system of the United States of America. And I remember in 3rd grade, I only learned that there were like a handful of Native American tribes. Sioux, Navajo, Apache, just literally like a few. Until I started curating it in Reflect Space, and we did a Native American genocide exhibit that, oh my goodness, there are thousands of tribes, different languages in the different regions. We're in the Tongva right now. There's so much. So education, my point is education. The schools don't teach it. Where do we learn it? And then how do we appreciate it? And then how do we know from right and wrong when we're not taught these things? We don't know, and we can't pursue the justice. So they're layered, and they go hand in hand, and they require a lot of bandwidth, resources, and not to give up, because it's so easy to say, you throw your hands up in the air and say, oh my God, we're never gonna be able to win this struggle, win this fight, which is not true, because it depends on who we band with, who we move forward with, and create the bulk of the resources in order to overcome the injustice. And I think that's really critical. And I think I'm really also proud of the fact that we were able to build this alliance between the Armenian and the Korean, and understand and appreciate and be able to move forward and then learn from one another. What worked for you may not work for me. What worked for me may not work for you. What worked for you may work for me. So through these collaborations, these educational processes, we learn and we take it to the next level.
Thank you. So my question to you both, listening to you both today, I'm struck by the idea that historical justice depends on more than governments. It also depends on educators, lawyers, artists, community organizations, and ordinary citizens. If each of you could ask this audience to do one thing after leaving today, what would that be?
I'd love to go first. Thank you. I would love for you to visit Reflect Space and learn about the different issues that are brought into that little corner of the big library in the 4th largest city of the county of Los Angeles, here in Glendale, California, because you are inevitably going to learn something that you didn't know, just like I learned something I didn't know. So I urge you to illuminate yourself and your person sitting next to you, person at home, your friend, your colleague, whomever, to also learn and appreciate the things that you know or you don't know, but to learn. So it's opening up a book. It's opening up our minds and our spaces, and to be able to go, and have that epiphany sort of moment. And I think that's really critical. And I think that's what when we have these exchanges, when we're no longer in our digital, wherever we are, in the computers and the laptops and telephones and iPads and things like that, to pass on and to have that connectivity to that human connection, because I think we really understand and appreciate better on another level when it's done that way.
I'll be there. I want to say listening is participating. And all of you are just fantastic listeners. So first of all, thank you very much. So I think if we can all continue to be good listeners, that's very essential, that's important. But on top of that, I think it's very important for us to be critical thinkers and lifelong learners who want to find the truth about what happened in the past and do something about it. Because at the end of the day, we all want to live in a world where peace and security is a basic parameter, is something that is given to everyone. And when there's a say in a peace and security provided for everyone, we'll experience definitely less discrimination, and there will be much less gap in many different sectors. So let's just, if all of us can continue to be good listeners and wanting to find truth and do something about it in different ways that we can all contribute, I think that would be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Your presentations remind us that justice isn't simply about what happened in the past. It's about the choices we continue to make today, what we remember, what we teach, what we challenge, and whose voices we choose to elevate. We'd now like to open the floor for questions from the audience, if any.
It's not so much a question as the women's slavery that happened, and that attention is trying to be brought to and justice being done. When you think about it right now, today, in the world, it's still happening somewhere.
Yeah.
Whether it's sex slaves being imported from Eastern Europe, or here in America, especially here in America, it becomes so frustrating, first as a human being, second as a woman, to constantly come across these things that you hear in the news, that you read in newspapers, that you need in novels or crime novels, and you see on television every day. It's become immune. It seems that people have become immune to the fact that not just women, but children are being abducted and put into slavery. I just feel absurd. I feel like helpless. Like Anahidd was saying a few minutes ago, I'm constantly become so emotional and angry that I can't get over it enough to say, okay, what can I do about this? So my question is, if there's a question, what do we do about this? That brings me to a second thing. Whenever there is anything that talks about women, whether it's a movie made by a woman or movies they advertise themselves as chick flicks, quote unquote. Right? The word I hate the most is using the word chick for women anyway. But no men go to see stories that are about women. How do we educate men to be interested, to care, or they don't have to feel the same way we do when I watch a woman's story, but it doesn't stop me from living 10,000 novels about men. Most novels are about men, or about that men have written it. So what do we do? Education, obviously, I think, and not just in the schools. Obviously, the whole school education system has to change. But at home, it's how mothers end up treating their sons versus how they're treating their daughters. So how do we bring this issue up not as derogatory or as discipline or as we're insulting men or whatever, but how do we make it, another thing I hate, but I have to say it, but how do we make it sexy? Do you know what I mean? everything in society now, from selling milk to a philosophical issue, the concept comes that how do we make it palatable? How do we deal with the issue now, today, not just about historical facts, but about what's happening now? And I mean, nobody's got the answer, obviously, but that's something that I think we can go away from here, because what you two discussed just brought this big microscope on the thing that's still going on. And it just, what do we do? How do we do it?
I think I have a clear answer to your question, but I believe that every one of us in this space has answered some of your questions through their lived experiences, and I want to assume that every mom and grandma and a sister and a father and brother, uncle have done their job, making sure that all girls and boys are equally dignified, and all human beings, regardless of the race, ethnicity, and whatnot, we're all equally valued. So we've done a good job. So I think maybe we can all, in our own space, reach out a little bit to our neighbors and to our friends and just keep on expanding. I think that's maybe one small but very small answer. But if we look at we have an incredible team of panelists for this afternoon, and one of the panelists is Christine Hong, and she has brought her daughter to this event, and if I'm not mistaken, she has been coming with her mom to events like this ever since she was a little girl. So Kristen, for example, has been educating her daughter in a very sure and engaging way. So maybe, and I felt like maybe that's something I should have done when I was raising my daughter and son. So yeah.
Parents should bring parents should come, first of all, and bring thank you.
It's a rhetorical question. I don't even know where to begin to answer.
There's no answer. It's just.
I think the answer is we can't lose sight of that there's a possibility, there's hope to change, and it is through the education. And I think otherwise it's very overwhelming.
And the change of the entertainment business to not just glorify that stuff, but make everything else so interesting. Just the subject brought all that into.
Thank you so much for your presentation, both of you. And I wanted to ask a question about education. And the Gentry case, the plaintiff basically was attempting to assert that the statute pertained to a matter of foreign controversy, and therefore had no place, like in other words, city officials had no right to weigh in on a matter that's characterized as sort of foreign dispute, as though it's unsettled in any way. And that also pertains to education. So, Song, you're speaking, I have one of your packets for teachers, your booklet. You gave it to me years ago. It's an extraordinary resource. It's so heartening to hear that has been distributed widely, and that at St. Mary's College that it's actually a formal part of the curriculum. But there have also been efforts in recent years in California, specifically during a time of genocide, to disallow there being any engagement with what are called foreign matters within an ethnic studies curriculum. And that is an effort that was spearheaded by JPAC and the Legislative Jewish Caucus. And I just wonder, because both the statute and then the question of education and the question of whether or not is there a place within the United States in terms of education, both public education from statutes, etc., in terms of innovative lawsuits, in terms of what's taught in the classroom for these matters, and how would you argue that, especially against some of the reactionary arguments that say those are not domestic issues. If you're going to teach anything about communities of color, they have to be drilled down to the parameters of the United States proper. I just wonder how you would respond to something like that.
I think it's really critical to say that these are the issues and bring it to the classroom and say these are the views and what do you think. It's the forcing the critical thinking aspect, presenting the issue, because it's one of those really tricky things with genocide. I mean, the whole legal battle for Armenians for over 100 years is to be able to use the word genocide because the government does not recognize it, and Turkey fights it because it means that the floodgate will open doors of repatriation, restitution, and all sorts of other things that they're not willing to do, and it's because of the word genocide, because the UN Convention says if it's genocide, then you have to do this, then you can bring them to court. So there's so many ramifications. So when we say, okay, we're going to talk about this issue, and by the way, I served on the board of the Armenian National Committee, and one of our committees was the Education Committee to be able to go and lobby the state education, yes, the DOE,
In California?
the Secretary of Education, where we would meet with them and say these textbooks are, they don't portray specifically this chapter about the war, about the Armenians and the pictures, and we had to educate them and bring in our 2 cents and then give all the information, the research, and basically flip it, but then again, the other side is also doing the same thing, right? They're pouring in resources, so you have to be really on your toes, monitoring and saying, okay, is that textbook for this grade level accurate? And what can be done? And it's a battle. It's a battle. It's a constant battle. It's constant. It's politicized, and it's never ending. But we have to be aware and attuned and ready for action. But back in the classroom, you mention it. I'm sure what you do, right? And you are able to bring it to the class and say, this is a contentious issue. This word is a contentious issue. Sex slavery or the comfort woman issue it's an issue or not. What do you think? And this is how you present it, and have them critically think about it, and then have them do the other research and decide which is the valid or which is more plausible, equitable, and let them decide. It's the critical thinking. I think that's really critical.
I agree, and I know that I talked a lot about individuals making differences to some of your questions and comments. But while each individual makes efforts, I do believe that we need systemic contributions and systemic changes. And in that regard, I am proud to say that San Francisco Unified School District has done such thing. And I am going to talk a little more about what the district has done in 2015 and 16. But the history of sexual slavery and the conflict-related violence is unfortunately very common in many different cultures and histories. And San Francisco Board of Education decided to encourage their high school teachers in 10th grade to incorporate comfort woman history as part of World War II curriculum. And they encouraged their teachers to teach that. So I think while individuals do what we can, we also need to we need to elevate our voices and talk to school board, the professionals, and above to make some structural changes. And because the parents and teachers and advocates and politicians were able to do that, teaching Kung-Fu woman history within the San Francisco Unified School District is nothing uncommon. So we just have to keep doing that. And the SFUSD has also tried very hard to make sure this history is taught throughout the state of California. So we need to do more of that. Thank you.
I have a question. Yes. No, I can project this. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question for each of you. First, Son, you touched upon it a little bit in your presentation. Is this silence that came after the main traumatic event, after the liberation, after the end of colonization and the return of women home, and there's this 50 years of silence. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about that, why, how, and what were the conditions for that? Plus, how can we prevent that in the future? If there's something like this happens, does the community have to wait still? Will it take 50 years to address that?
Yeah, I want to stress the importance of peace and security again, because the reason these women did not have safe space to share their voices is because Korea was under military dictatorship, which did not allow freedom of expression. And so there was a huge human rights abuse going on until the late 1980s. And to change that, the systemic, the problem, citizens, especially students, and I can go way back to right after the Korea's liberation from Japan, but before, so I mean, I don't want to go too back, but after 1945, there were constant struggles coming from students as young as elementary school students, wanting democracy and peace in the Korean Peninsula. And so that kind of movement became like a foundation and the fertilizer for the further democratization movement that happened in South Korea. And as you may know, there was a huge repression of democracy movement in 1980 in Gwangju. But we all, like the Korean people, persevered, and they just kept going, and that allowed that pivotal like a change in 1987, where we were able to elect our the South Korean president through elections. So that was 1987. That was first time. And then from that point on, I think the South Korean government is still in the process of wanting to and needing to advance its democracy and its structure, so that the government never allows another martial law, which happened, quite recently. So yeah, I think it's that grassroots movement wanting democracy and wanting that peace, and it took 50 years for people to reach that point. And I think it's just so remarkable that people never gave up and kept on fighting their fight for the past 50 years. And because of that, these survivors were able to break their silence. And it was very, very challenging.
In the spirit of the seminar, could I direct respond as well?
Absolutely.
I would say it's U.S. Cold War security imperialism. And in a nutshell. And so when Song is speaking about Gwangju, that was during the Carter administration. The United States to this day, still in times of heightened war crisis, has command, control, control over South Korea's military. So South Korea's situation is semi-sovereign at best. It is a junior partner of the United States. It's militarily occupied to this day. Roughly 30, it's about 27 or 28,000 military forces, U.S. forces, are on the southern part of the Korean Peninsula. There are roughly 80 military installations that the United States uses, and according to mutual defense agreements, it can use at limited will nominally South Korean bases, ports, etc. And so in that particular context, as Sung was saying in a different, you're going to see an interview, U.S. geopolitical interests overrode everything else. And Japan, which has a war criminal history, was recuperated as a premier ally within the region. And therein lies the reason for silence. And if you spoke out, there are consequences to bear.
I had a more legal question. So, as you presented this very interesting, different ways that lawyers are trying to get legal settlements against the Turkish government. The Korean-Japanese issue is still not settled either, right? So the Japanese have not completely admitted to what they did. Very little reparations have been done. So does the Koreans have to do similar kind of legal battles to try to get recognition? What do you think about that?
I think that's always an issue, and it's like, how do you move forward? And as a matter of fact, yesterday I was speaking to the attorney of the Hazaryan case, and how long it took, and how many years, and each, and I think what Turkey was trying to do, and I asked him actually, I said, do you think they were waiting for the plaintiff to pass away? Because then, there were tactics. The court was on its own dismissing, or wanted to dismiss, or, just taking action unnecessarily because the defendant wasn't even in the court, but he was doing things for the defendant's sake that would benefit the defendant. And Gardner, the lawyer, said, I just hope that, lawyers will see this and they will be motivated and inspired to put resources and work toward something that will bring to light or even make new and innovative ways to make arguments against in court or in political arenas or what have you. So it's very important, I think, for any litigant or any person who there's injustice suffered, right, to think outside the box and to make, again, these connections and connectivities to say that worked for you, is it going to work for me, or how else can let's rethink this. And I think the times are changing. Geopolitics is constantly changing. We feel very suffocated or sometimes really too small to make any difference, but eventually, even after 50 years, 100 years, 89 years, things will change. Maybe not in our lifetimes, and it's very frustrating, and we can get so emotional, but tides change, tides turn, and it's possible. Did I answer your question?
Thank you all for your engagement. This concludes session 1 of today's event. We will reconvene in an hour from 12:45 to 1:30 after lunch. And we hope that you're able to come back and join us for another session of really important topics. Thank you.
Sorry,